Hi, I'm Thomas, a co-founder of Visplore. Today I'm going to show you how you can label patterns of machine operations in Visplore and how you can integrate this labeling step in your existing workflow. You can also try it out yourself. Just download the Visplore story files that you find in the links of the description of this video. All right, now labeling time series data from sensors is a key use case of Visplore, and a really unique feature here is the ability to label recurring patterns like machine operations very effectively. So the first question is typically, how can I get my data of the machine operations into Visplore? The answer is there are multiple options. It just depends on how you have the data already in your system. So in some cases, you have the operations given explicitly. For example, you have one file per operation pattern. Each file holds one pattern, for example, a press stroke or a shot curve, just one signal during the operation. So in this case, you can import these operations all at once and start labeling right away. I will show you this in a second. Or, second option, if you're starting with a raw time series signal, you may extract the operations directly in Visplore and then start the labeling. I will show this too. So let's take a look at the first case where you already have the machine operations given as value vectors. One way of getting them into Visplore is through our Python API. This is something that our data science users usually love. Here you see a data frame with 526 machine operations. So each row that you see here was one item that was manufactured using a mechanical press. And here you see the timestamp when it was manufactured, along with some context information, what product was made here. Then you have some numerical measurements like a quality, for example. And then here, this is actually the value vectors of each press stroke. So this would be the force of the press as a signal over time. And what you can do now is to use our Python API here to start Visplore and send this data frame over. And now Visplore has opened up, and what you have here is actually an overview of your 526 press strokes, really along with the curves. And you could, for example, just select some of them here to see them over time, what the quality of each press stroke was. And then you could already start labeling here. For example, I could say create a label for these. Label. And you see I have labeled these press strokes here already. Okay, before going into details about the labeling, this was just one way of getting your data in through the Python API. You can also import your machine operations via files. So sometimes you have this situation here. You have a long list of files, here CSVs for example, and each of them refers to one machine operation. So let me just open one of them here in Excel. And you see here, for example, how this machine operation here is actually also a signal over time. And this would be similar for each of these press strokes. And the second thing you need here is a certain kind of master file. Let me open this here. And here you would see, again, similar to the Python example, just all of your machine operations as rows. Again, with the time, the context, the quality, but here you would have a link to the particular file holding the press stroke of that particular machine operation. Okay, so this is just a link to the other files I just showed you from the other folder. And what you could do with Visplore now is to load that particular master table file. So when you start Visplore, you can directly load that master file here as a CSV file. And by doing so, you see here the preview, actually the links to the individual files are resolved. And you are at the same point as before where you could, for example, start again labeling some curves here or here, etc. So you see, if you have your files like press strokes or shot curves as individual files, you can just load them here as well, like that. The third option that I want to show you is extracting the patterns from the raw time series signals, because sometimes you don't have them as nicely extracted as I showed you here. And for this, I'm opening up another Visplore, and here I'm loading a file with a raw signal. Now this could of course also come directly from your live source, like a database or a time series historian. Okay. And now you see this would be a raw time series file where you have a continuous signal of the force over time. And in this case, I'm loading a different cockpit here, one for pattern search and extraction. So what we see here is, now we have this raw time series signal, and if I zoom in here, what you would see is the individual press strokes. So sometimes the press is not manufacturing something, but then here it's pressing an item, here it's pressing another item, and so on. Okay, let's give this more space here. All right, so before we can label the individual items here, we have to extract them from this time series. And this we can easily do if we have such a recurring process like here. We can just select one example pattern, then say we want to search this pattern. Okay, give it a name. And now Visplore automatically searches this time series for the most similar matches of this pattern. And you see it has already found 56 matches here and overlaid them on top of each other. And here you would see exactly when each such match was manufactured. Now, a similarity search is always related to a threshold, what is still similar enough to be considered. And this is what this little visualization here helps you with. It shows you now the threshold is this red line here, is giving you 56 matches, but if you make it more tolerant, you see how more and more matches are actually found here. Okay, and this is actually quite simple to segment, so we can set the threshold tolerant enough to find all the patterns. And now we are at the same position as we were before. We have nicely extracted these press curves here from the raw signal. And now we can go into the labeling process. So for example, we see here that we have two distinct clusters in this data. Yeah. One is where the data is rising quite steeply and then staying up here in a straight pattern. Okay. And we could select them and just label them as steep slope, for example. Okay. And you see now how I have labeled them. There is actually a large number of graphical tools for selecting the curves and for labeling them. Yeah, so you can interactively add labels, subtract labels, correct labels, etc., just directly in the graphics. And then we could, for example, select the other patterns here that are much rounder and give them the label round slope. Okay. Yeah. And now you see that I have actually nicely labeled these two clusters of machine operations. And here we also see, for example, that we had a certain transition over time, so that the round slopes were all in the beginning and the steep slopes were coming afterwards. So maybe there was some operation parameter just changed in between here. And when you're done with the labeling, you can also export the labels. So for example, here you would see now your original table with all individual raw measurements and force values, and then the according label that we have given to it. So for example, if we select some pattern here, you would see the label steep slope assigned to it. Okay. And what we can do now from this table here is just to export our labeled data. For example, we can export this table to the clipboard and just paste the table here. So you would see I have my labeled signal where at some point I have some round slopes, for example. Alternatively, you can also export the labels back to Python. So let me switch to my Python environment. And here, with just one line of code, you can retrieve the labeling object from Visplore. And for example, if you wanted to have something like the number of occurrences of each label, you could also print it like this. So this shows you that you can retrieve the labels back to Python and then just write them to a database if you want to. And this allows you to integrate this also into an existing workflow where you label the data step by step and write the labels back to a database. And the whole step of extracting the patterns and labeling them, you can save as a template that you can apply again next week to the newest data. So for example, if you save this here, you can save it as a template, as a Visplore file that can be applied to the newest data next week and then does the extraction as well as the labeling already for you, which you can also automate using the Python API. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to learn more, please contact us for a live demo or a trial. Happy Visploring!